the host of Ringside Report Radio, which can be heard right here on TSN 690 late nights, Wednesday and Friday night. You can also check out the website, www.ringsidereport.net. And you can also follow him on twitter.com/Dave Simon MMA. What's going on, Dave?
A lot, man. UFC on Fox went down last night. UFC 159, 6 days away now. John Jones set to defend the UFC light heavyweight title against Chael Sonnen. We had a title match last night. Gilbert Melendez and Benson Henderson go the distance. And Benson retains the UFC lightweight championship. A split decision win for Benson Henderson. 2 judges scoring it 3 rounds to 2 for Benson. The other scoring it 3 rounds to 2 for Gilbert Melendez.
You like those 5-round matches, Dave, when they go the distance?
Yeah. I mean, it was a great fight last night. It was a very, very close fight. I think it could have gone either way. I thought Melendez actually squeaked by and should have won the judge's decision, but it was real close. All of those rounds, except for the fourth, could have gone either way. I thought the fourth was the only one that was clearly for Benson Henderson, but yeah, great fight, 5-rounder. I mean, sometimes it's not great, but usually if it's a 5-round fight, they're going to fill 25 minutes, and it's going to be action-packed.
Well, that's what you want, I would think, when you have the fights on a network. Now, Dave, I mentioned something or asked you about something off air. Now, there's only been a couple of women's fights so far in the UFC, but we haven't seen any of them on network television. Do you think that it'll take a while before we see that?
I think it's just a matter of getting the right women's fight on network TV. We've only seen 2 of them. We've seen Ronda Rousey main event pay-per-view, and we saw Miesha Tate and Kat Zingano fight last week on Fuel TV. So there hasn't been that many women's fights. I think eventually we'll see a women's fight on Fox. It just has to be the right fight at the right time. And we will have a women's fight on the undercard of the pay-per-view. Sarah McMahon, an undefeated fighter. She's 6-0. She won a silver medal for wrestling in the Olympics for the United States. So she is very, very tough.
Credible, yep.
Yeah, a lot of people looking at her as a possible challenge for Ronda Rousey down the line. So Sarah McMahon will make her UFC debut on Saturday night at UFC 159 against Sheila Gaff. Should be an interesting fight. A lot of really good fights coming up on Saturday. A lot of really good fights last night as well.
Dave Simon chatting with us from ringsidereport.net and Ringside Report Radio as we go over the fight game. That was pretty good, right? That sounded like I was really into it there, yeah. All right, moving on, Dave.
Yeah, that was great.
Dave,
yes.
What is the big conjecture right now? What is the big speculation as to the next big fight that isn't signed yet in the UFC that people are looking forward to or are hypothesizing that will happen?
Well, there was news this week that just came through. Dana White saying Georges St-Pierre is going to get the option to either fight Johnny Hendricks or wait and see what Anderson Silva does against Chris Weidman. And if GSP wants Silva next, that's what he will get. So that I think
what does
is
the GSP camp want?
Well, we don't know yet. They haven't really made their decision. I think the GSP camp will probably take the Johnny Hendricks fight right now. I think Hendricks is a guy that has been calling GSP out for a while. It's a fight that makes sense. GSP, 2 fights now into this part of his career post-knee surgery. I think that he's going to want another fight at welterweight, really clean out the division, which I think a win over Hendricks would put him in a spot where there really aren't any challenges left at 170 pounds. And I think that after the Hendricks fight would be the best time for him to go up and fight Anderson, probably at 185 pounds, and maybe a move to the middleweight division would be permanent for GSP, but I just don't see that fight happening next.
How old is GSP? How much longer do you think he's going to keep fighting?
Yeah, he's, I think, 32 years old, 31, 32, he's in that range. So, it depends how long he wants to fight for. It really does. I mean, he doesn't seem like a guy that's going to fight that much longer. I don't see him
fighting. He's not going to be a Randy Couture, really?
No, I don't see him fighting into his 40s. I would even be surprised to see him fighting past the age of 35. So I think he's got maybe 3 good years, 2-3 good years left in him. 4 to 6 fights left in the UFC at the very most, and then that'll be it for GSP. I mean, if you look at it right now, he could fight Johnny Hendricks, beat him, and then if he were to match up against Anderson Silva in his next fight, win or lose, that's a fight you can retire on, especially if you win. And George has talked a lot about wanting to retire on top, wants to retire before he loses, before he's no longer in his prime, wants to retire as the champion, and that means maybe retiring before people want him to go, but I think it also means retiring within the next couple of years.
That's the way I look at it with game points. As soon as the show starts going downhill, I might step away. But
when are you going to hit the peak?
Oh, very nice, very nice. Good guy there.
You haven't quit yet, so I'm just waiting. You know,
is taking the Johnny Hendricks fight to some going to look like that he's avoiding Anderson Silva?
Yeah, I would say the short answer would be yes. But at the same time, maybe taking the Anderson Silva fight, Johnny Hendricks is going to talk a lot. Johnny Hendricks has already said a lot of things about GSP. After he heard the news that GSP would get the option, he said, look, I think George should surrender the title and give up the championship if he is to go up and fight Anderson Silva. So I think he's kind of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. If he takes the fight with Anderson, well, there'll be a certain number of people that will say, well, he's scared of Johnny Hendricks and he doesn't want that fight. And if he takes the fight with Hendricks, people will say, well, why is he afraid to fight Anderson Silva? I think he's got a career path set out, and I think that path is Johnny Hendricks and then Anderson Silva. But I wonder if he waits too long for the Anderson Silva fight, he might not get it. You know, Anderson Silva's not getting any younger. He's 38 years old. He's fighting Chris Weidman in July. If he gets past Weidman, which most expect him to do, but Weidman is saying he's going to stop Anderson. You know, you never know what Anderson's going to do next. Would he fight John Jones after that? And then that's the big super fight. And that, you know, a fight with Jones, win or lose, is a fight for Anderson to retire on. Mm-hmm. So George right now has the option and has to think, well, what do I want to do? But also, what's Anderson Silva going to do? And if I don't take this fight right now, will I ever get that fight? And he knows there's a lot of money behind it, and it would be a great fight to have, and everybody wants to see it. And I think maybe looking back on Georges St-Pierre's career, you would look at it as incomplete if he doesn't fight Anderson Silva. It's a fight that people have been talking about for years, and if he never fights him, people may always question, you know, what about Anderson? He never fought Anderson.
Sort of like a guy like Lennox Lewis, where people thought, well, he just didn't get the opponents in his prime that maybe some of the fighters previous to him had.
And Lennox went out on top, and people are always going to question that, you know?
Game Points here on TSN 690, talking to Dave Simon about the UFC and MMA. Dave, you mentioned John Bones Jones. It's a guy that, is the guy in terms of marketability, you could argue, of the UFC.
Georges St-Pierre is the guy.
There are some names, obviously.
Yeah, Jones he's one of the guys.
He's one of the guys.
Sure, yeah.
He's one of the guys. So if you're talking about a super fight down the line with maybe an Anderson Silva or something like that, it's not like boxing where everybody's independent and promoters kind of broker fights. Everyone works for the UFC. So how much leverage do you have in trying to get a bigger payday for a fight? Do you have fights that don't happen because the fighter's saying, no, I want more money than that? I mean, tell us how that works.
Well, they're signed to a fight contract. So whatever the UFC says, you kind of, that's the money that you have that you already signed off on. Anderson Silva's still kind of working on brokering a new deal with the UFC. I don't think he's signed his new deal. And there's always that pay-per-view percentage, right? So if you get, say $1 or $2 from every pay-per-view sold, and you wind up selling 3 million pay-per-views, you're going to get a lot of money. So it really all depends on how they have it in their contract, when their contract runs out.
So
but it is kind of set, what you make per fight. So in your deal with the UFC.
If they are under contract for 3 fights and they have one more fight left, that's what they're going to get paid. It's just the other things that come into play, like the pay-per-views.
Yeah, I mean, there's always extra provisions in the contract, and the UFC, they're going to take care of you. If there's a big fight, they're not going to, let you get screwed over. You're going to make your money that you deserve, especially if you're somebody that's such a valuable commodity to them, like a John Jones or GSP or whoever it is.
Wednesdays and Friday nights, Ringside Report Radio with Dave Simon. Coming up on Wednesday, Dave, what do you have?
We will recap the UFC show that just happened on Fox. 2 hours on Wednesday. We'll have a lot, maybe some special guests as well. You got to tune in to find out. Or follow me on Twitter at Dave Simon MMA.